Today I'm at Woodside Park and... Wait a minute. This isn't Woodside Park, this is Woodside. I can't believe it, this is the third time I've... Never mind. Let's just hang on a second. That's better. This was supposed to be a completely different video. I was going to talk about long-term economics of railways, particularly how they relate to one specific line, and I'd been wrestling with it for hours, trying to get a decent script out of the concept. And the whole thing was quite annoying and frankly very boring. So I scrapped that video and decided instead to make a self-indulgent video on a station I like. So, Woodside Park. Woodside Park is on the Northern Line's High Barnet branch. I covered the history of that branch in more detail in my recent-ish video on High Barnet, so I'll put a link in the description below if I remember. Short version, this branch was planned by the Edgware, Highgate and London Railway to link various towns and villages north of London to the Great Northern Railway. The Great Northern took the company over before the railway opened. Everyone won. The locals got their railway, and the Great Northern got a slice of that sweet, sweet commuter traffic. From about the First World War onwards, the line suffered from competition from buses, trams, and the Underground. In 1935, it was proposed that the Underground should take this line over and make it part of what would soon become known as the Northern Line. This was completed in 1940, and it's been part of the Northern Line ever since. What I like about Woodside Park specifically, though, is how Victorian it looks. When it was first opened in 1872, this area was quite rural. At first the station was called Torrington Park, which was the name given to a part of the estate around a local stately home, which was called Woodside House. In the same year as the railway arrived, the owner of the house, Joseph Baxendale, died and left his estate to a newly formed charitable trust that converted it into a retirement home. This retirement home was funded by selling off the Torrington Park lands, and naturally, housing developers took an interest. After just a month, the station was renamed to Torrington Park Woodside. A decade after that, it became Woodside Park. The area around here was advertised by the railway and property developers alike as the Northern Heights. The great attraction here, as with so many of the new suburbs, was the fact that one could live in the country and work in the city. In the Great Northern Railway's book, Where to Live, they described Woodside Park as having rural surroundings and pure air. But by the time that was published in 1908, this was definitely verging on false advertising. Houses were a little slower to spring up here than elsewhere in the locality. It was in the late 1920s that a local entrepreneur, one Fred Ingram, began work on a new garden suburb, a planned community centred around the station. Houses, shops and roads were rapidly constructed to feed the enormous appetite Londoners had for moving out of the crowded and polluted city centre. By the outbreak of the Second World War, Woodside Park had become essentially a fully fledged suburb. That being said, it was one of the lesser-used stations of the Northern Heights, and indeed it still is, even though no one calls it the Northern Heights anymore. Well, except tube nerds. The station became part of the Underground in 1940 with the completion of electrification works, which encouraged further development. The last mainline passenger trains on the line, operated by the London and North Eastern Railway, called here in 1941. Woodside Park had been built with a goods yard, like most stations. When the railway had been planned, it was envisaged as being primarily for agricultural traffic, milk and hay mostly. But the suburb took up more and more of the farmland, and in 1962 the goods yard closed for good. But where one door closes, another opens, as they do say. The goods yard was turned into a car park, which made the line more attractive to people who would otherwise have driven into London. Despite the station's relative quietness, it was the target of a bombing by the Provisional IRA in December 1992. Fortunately, there were no injuries. These days, Woodside Park still feels very Victorian and retains a lot of original features. There's a Victorian post box, a Great Northern Railway signal box, Great Northern Railway benches of 2 different types. There's even a fireplace in the old booking hall. I think Woodside Park is one of the most characterful stations on the Northern Line and perhaps on the entire Underground. Despite the frequent service, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see the station of 1872. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little change tale from the tube. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon and here on YouTube for your always appreciated support. You are the garden estate to my country station. And I will see you all again very soon for another Tale from the Tube.